Welcome to Mentors on the Mic, the podcast where we dive into the career paths of the most accomplished and respected professionals in the entertainment industry, how they got their start, how they moved up to where they are today, and how you can too. This episode is powered by WelcomeToTimesSquare.com, the billboard where you can be a star for a day. I'm your host, Michelle Simone Miller, and today I'm thrilled to welcome a true theater legend. This is really special to me. Jeffrey Seller is the Tony Award-winning producer behind Rent, Avenue Q, In the Heights, and of course, Hamilton. His shows have earned 22 Tony Awards, which is insane, including 4 for Best Musical, and his productions and tours have grossed more than $4.6 billion, which is a weird, crazy thing to think about and process. He's also the author of a beautiful and deeply personal new memoir entitled Theater Kid, which explores how a boy from suburban Detroit falls in love with Broadway and chases that dream all the way to the top. Jeffrey Seller, welcome, and thank you for being on Mentors on the Mic podcast.
Michelle, I'm so happy to be here with you today and talk about my favorite subject, which is Broadway and making musicals.
I thought you were going to be like me. I'm so excited to talk about me, my favorite subject.
Only Katharine Hepburn could have the audacity and probably the place to call her famous autobiography Me.
Me.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, this one's titled Theater Kid, which we're going to talk about a lot because I absolutely love it. I have little Post-it notes. I don't like writing in books if I can help it, so I haven't highlighted anything, but I pointed out with a pen where I want to discuss certain things. But I always start off the podcast, what was your first role in the entertainment industry?
I am going to interpret industry as meaning a professional industry where you actually get a job that pays you.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, my first job when I got to New York was as a publicist. And I was able to get that job, even though I was a producer wannabe and a director wannabe, because when I was a student at the University of Michigan, I used to write articles and reviews for the Michigan Daily, the student newspaper, and the Ann Arbor News. In all of my years doing theater, I started writing press releases for my youth theater group when I was 14 years old for the Stagecrafter Ragamuffins in Clawson, Michigan.
Yes.
And I would write the press releases. I would design the program cover, and I would sell ads to support the marketing campaign, all for our youth theater group. So when I was graduating from Michigan, and I was asking that question that I know so many of your listeners are asking of themselves, what do I do with a BA in English?
Yeah, that's what I had that thought too.
Right? Or what do I do with a BFA in theater?
Right.
No one's going to hire us at age 22 to become a producer, a director, an actor, even a set designer. So we've got to get that first job.
Yeah.
So I made that strategic decision, go get a job in publicity. You actually have the goods to get it.
And then you got paid. And you got health insurance, right, for this one?
So
that was a big deal.
It was a big deal because I never had health insurance during college.
Yeah.
Our family couldn't afford it. We were poor. So though I put myself through college, I was flying there without a net. And it was the AIDS epidemic.
Yeah.
And I'm gay, and I was scared.
Yeah.
And I got that first job in publicity, and my take-home pay was $205 a week, plus that health insurance. And just so you see how my mind works, okay, so that's $820 a month minus the $400 for rent, meaning I have $410 a month, but I have to pay $120 for my guaranteed student loans, which means I have $300 a month, and I would live on $75 a week.
Which is it's a crazy thing to think about right now, right? Like
now, the subway was only $1.
Yes. And a lot of things were much more, less expensive because, inflation.
But that's how I started.
Yeah. So you had that job, and I remember you in reading this that you were like, at one point, I have to leave. I have to be closer to Broadway. You felt far from Broadway.
Well, when I first got to New York, I didn't know how to penetrate the insular community of Broadway. Yeah. Like I knew that Broadway had publicists, But they were a special group. Like this thing that I learned was the AtPam publicist, which is
Yeah.
a union publicist. And they were not part of the wide world of publicity agencies that were listed in books and stuff like that. And I knew that there were ad agencies, but I didn't know what they were. And I did not know how to get in. So I got into this first agency. And it turned out that the guy that I worked with there used to work in one of the Broadway agencies.
Yeah.
So he started telling me about how it all works and how Judy Jacksina works and Fred Nathan works and all the big publicists of the time. He told me about the ad agencies, Sereno Coin. And I stayed in that job for 10 months.
Yeah.
And I did some publicity for Another World, the soap opera, and As the World Turns. And I had a couple of good experiences, but for the most part, I was not challenged enough. And I just was yearning to get closer to Broadway. Yeah. And it was about 9 or 10 months into that job that I heard that the Weisslers, the great Barry and Fran Weissler, who were of the most active producers of that time, most as the producers of touring revivals with stars in them.
Right.
So at the time that I interviewed with them, they were doing Joel Grey in Cabaret. They were executive producing Robert Goulet in South Pacific, and they were getting ready to do Topol and Fiddler on the Roof. So they had a lot of action going on. And I heard that they had an opening at the office, and I got an interview.
And they were doing what you wanted to be doing.
They were doing all of it. They were producing in-house. And then I learned what general management was. They were doing that in-house. And then I learned what booking was,
right,
which was booking those musicals all over America, from San Francisco to Denver to Columbus to Scranton to Providence.
Which I think people don't realize is a large chunk of how shows make their money. Right.
Oh my gosh.
A lot of times people just think of shows being, okay, it's lucrative on Broadway, great, they're making money. A lot of it comes down to the tour.
Our Broadway system, our ecosystem, is completely dependent on both Broadway and the road or touring. Because if you think about it, ultimately, more people have seen Hamilton all over America than have ever seen it on Broadway.
It's crazy.
We actually gross more money out on the road with our shows when it's all said and done than we do on Broadway, because there's 80, 100 cities out there.
That's crazy. It makes sense. Lovely. So I remember you wrote in your book that you left, and this, I mean, it's apropos, this podcast is called Mentors on the Mic, but you left UMichigan without mentors. And I've had the same experience. I went to Brandeis in Massachusetts, and I felt like I left without mentors. I didn't realize the importance of that. I didn't know how to cultivate mentors at the time, which is one of the reasons why I created this podcast a few years ago. I wanted to ask, firstly, was that a subconscious or conscious goal of yours when you graduated school, when you realized you didn't have any mentors to help? And were the Weisslers mentors for you?
You know what's interesting? I had mentors in high school.
Okay.
I even had mentors in middle school at the University of Michigan, which had a unremarkable kind of dispersed theater department in which I actually used theater as a minor, not a major. So there I never cultivated mentors.
You're a political science major?
I got a poli-sci degree, and I was in many shows, and I directed many shows, but I never had one mentor. And it was not subconscious. It was just what was happening. And when I got to New York and started working at the Weisslers, I was basically getting a PhD in all of the forms of producing. Watching Barry and Fran, who were producing, watching Alicia Parker, who was general managing, watching, of course, Susan Weaving, who was my direct boss, who was the president of the booking division. And I worked in the booking division. So I was learning from all of them. But I did not consider any of them to be a mentor per se.
Like you were learning from them, but you didn't feel like it was a relationship in which they invested in you in a very personal way? What made them not feel like mentors, out of curiosity?
I was doing a really good job, and they were reaping the rewards of my work. But there was no special personal connection. There was just really good work.
Got it.
I'm going to give you a good example of a mentor that came a little bit later.
Yeah.
After I left the Weissler office, I ultimately became a booker for the great producer of the Muni, Paul Blake,
Yeah.
and his associate producer, Kevin McCollum.
Right.
And Paul, being the age of my parents, was a great man of the theater. He produced shows at the Muni. He produced and directed shows on tour during the off season. And he had had a great career in the theater. And though our tastes were very different because he loved traditional musicals and I loved contemporary musicals, I felt I learned so much from him. And I give him credit because he said what I thought was maybe one of the most important phrases I ever heard up until that time. And he said, "Darling, when I sit at my desk every day, I invent myself every single day." Meaning, I have to generate my own work. I can't wait for someone to call me and offer me something. I have to go make it happen for myself. I create myself every single day. And that resonated deeply for me. And I realized it's true that I would have to generate my own work.
Which you did at various points in your story. There's one particular moment that I really wanted to talk to you about. It was you went on this survival 3-week thing called Outward Bound, which I found so
I love
interesting.
you, Michelle, for bringing that up. You're the first person who's brought it up, and I'm like, did anyone ever read that chapter?
No, I love that chapter. And what stuck out to me, there was one particular line where you said at one point you're lost and you form a conclusion that you need to choose a direction and then keep walking forward. And for me, that was something I felt like kept coming up for me in the book.
Wow. Profound.
No, just that's how I saw the relationship with your family in a way, and with your father specifically, and what he was trying but maybe not being able to do, and then what you go, okay, I'm going to do this instead. And you kept doing that, where you had this goal in mind, I want to produce. And you might not know exactly how to get to that goal, but you tried different things, but it felt like you always had that goal. And I wanted to ask you firstly, when did that change to producing? Because I wasn't sure exactly in the book, because you acted a lot, you were in choir a lot, you grew up acting.
Yes.
When did it change for you where you were like, I now want to be a producer?
First of all, I love that metaphor you just brought up about being lost.
Yeah.
And what was so interesting was that I was lost in a forest, but I knew I was on an island.
That was nuts.
So ultimately, the only way out was to just pick a direction and go, knowing if I keep going, I will reach the water.
Yes.
I will reach the beach. And in my own progression in the theater, I acted in a play. Then I wrote a play.
Yep.
And
Adventureland.
And then with Adventureland, the play I wrote about my best friends and I got time in 5th grade in Mrs. Novetsky's class.
Which, by the way, did you ever think it mirrors Jonathan Larson creating a show about his friends in TikTok? I mean, I couldn't help but putting that connection together.
That's very sweet of you.
Maybe one of the reasons why, and we'll talk about it in a second, but like how meaningful and impactful seeing what later became Tick, Tick, Boom for the first time.
We write about our friends. We write our stories. And what did Lynn do within the Heights but write about his friends?
That's true.
So then we do Adventureland, and then I'm in the community theater as an actor. And
which, by the way, you got yourself. That was very impressive that you called up the place and you're like...
I made a cold call to
11? Were you 11?
No. Yes, exactly. I was 11.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And I picked up the white pagers and I wrote, "Where is Stagecrafters?" And I was like, "Oh, Bauer, Street and Clausen." I just picked up the phone and I called on a Saturday afternoon.
It's incredible.
And this woman said, "Well, if you come Monday night at 7 o'clock, we're having auditions. We need 2 kids for this show, a 9-year-old boy and a 7-year-old girl."
You're like, okay, I can do it. I'm
And
there.
I showed up on Monday night with my dad. Anyway, but in 8th grade, I'm in the youth theater group play called Popcorn Pete.
Yes.
And I am the Jack in the Box, and I'm having fun being the Jack in the Box in this silly play. And I noticed 3 things. One, I thought it was a stupid title.
Yeah.
2, it didn't have any conflict. Like, I was like, what is the major dramatic question of this play? And by the way, I'm using a phrase that I did not know the meaning of when I was 13
Right.
in that play. But I already had a sense of like, there's no conflict here.
Okay.
There's no question. And then 3 is the audiences were meager.
Right.
So I, after that play happened, said to the parent advisor of the group, I said, who picks the play?
Yeah.
And she says the play reading committee. And I said, I want to be on the play reading committee. That's the first move toward becoming a producer.
Got it.
It's the first move towards saying, instead of just being in the play, I want to pick the play. And that's a seminal moment.
Yeah.
And I'm in 8th grade.
Yeah.
By 9th grade, I'm writing the press releases and doing that other stuff I just talked about.
Right.
So before I can drive, I am basically picking plays, doing the publicity for the plays, writing the press releases, raising money for the plays by selling ads in the program, and working on the flyers that we send out to try to fill the seats. I am fulfilling in 9th and 10th grade all of the jobs of a producer.
Yeah.
And I'm still acting in plays
Yeah.
all through high school. And in college, I'm still acting the first couple years, but it was somewhere around the first year of college that I wanted to direct the play. And I got a job directing camp plays. And I enjoyed that very much. And that was around the time I started to learn more and more about the career of Hal Prince being a producer director. And that's when I kind of took on the mantle of saying, I want to be a producer director. And I actually made money in college directing. I used to get my work study money by directing because I was very good with finagling the system.
I wish I had a work study. I worked at the ticket office of my school. I wish it was a directing job that was also a work study
So
job.
I was able to somehow get the work study office to give me my work study by directing Anything Goes at Ann Arbor Civic Theater.
That's incredible.
And I made $450.
It's fantastic.
I know. So I didn't have to go get a job in the cafeteria or anything.
And you got to put it on your resume.
Unbelievable.
So great.
I can't even believe it now, but it's true. So I'm directing and producing and, of course, educating, right? Because I'm working with those campers.
Which, by the way, I loved hearing about the camp because I was a theater kid. I went to theater camp. I went to Stage Door Manor. And you talked about different shows throughout the book. And one show you talked about in particular was Pippin, which was my first theater camp show at Stage Door, directed by Larry Nye.
Oh.
I know. So when I was reading the book and I was like, you're talking about a choreographer named Larry Nye. I was like, that's the same Larry Nye that directed me in Pippin, who, by the way, the lead of that show was Shayna Taub.
Oh, my God. And was Shayna the leading player?
Yes, she was. And she was incredible. And what my favorite story about her is that the piano breaks down. It was an outdoor theater. The piano breaks down and she entertains the crowd for 10 minutes. Silently, by the way. She just walks around the stage. She's looking at her fake watch. She's like tapping her shoe. She's entertaining the audience. I left and my dad goes, who was that girl? Like that girl, like the whole thing was falling apart and she's just this professional at age like 14. That's Shayna.
Remarkable talent.
Yeah.
And you know who else was a great choreographer? Larry Nye.
Yeah.
And he and I did that production of Grease together at Michigan when we were both students.
Which I thought was very awesome to hear.
Yes.
Did you ever work with him again?
No.
Fair.
That's
fair.
He was on his way as a director choreographer, and I wish I did, but life takes
us. Yeah. No, I just thought it was this little funny little moment, little thing. But yes, so we were going into, where were we?
I know. I'm so thrown because the idea that you were at Stage Door being directed in Pippin by Larry Nye is
with Shayna as the lead player.
Is so moving to me.
So cool.
But I think one of the things we were talking about is how we loved shows like that. And what was
Yeah.
amazing about Pippin was that it was a show about events that took place hundreds of years ago during the Middle Ages, right? The time of Charlemagne.
Right.
But it was written in the early 70s by Stephen Schwartz in a contemporary vernacular. So the songs sounded more like Carly Simon or James Taylor than Rodgers and Hammerstein. And of course, Bob Fosse directed it in a completely contemporary physical vernacular
Right.
with magic and sexy bodies and sets that looked like ropes. And it was both it was a contemporary show about an old event. Does that remind you of any other musicals like Hamilton?
The thought crossed my mind. Yes,
Yeah, so
that's beautiful.
But anyway, so it was during that process. I'm directing, I'm producing.
Yes.
I get to New York. I'm producing and directing shows at night with my friends. I'm working at the Weisslers by day. I'm directing community theater by night. And then at one point, I get the wonderful Reformed Temple on the Upper West Side, Road of Shalom, who I've been directing community theater for, to help us, help Andrew Lippa and I, my college best friend, to do a new musical that
I like
he
how you
writes.
describe him as your college best friend.
He was my college best friend, and of course, he was my first boyfriend.
Yeah.
He was many things.
Yeah, he was many things.
And we get them to put up the money so we can do this new musical called A Pound of Feathers. And I'm producing it, and I'm directing it, and I'm trying to book all day, and it was overwhelming. I
Yeah.
actually overwhelmed myself, and it was through the process of doing that that I said, you might be one of the best producers around, but you're probably not going to be the best director around. And I started focusing purely on producing after doing that one show. And what's also interesting is we did that show in the fall of '89, and I meet Jonathan Larson really 9 months later
Which is crazy.
in September, October of 1990.
And you meet him, and this was beautiful. So you see his rock monologue, which was not called Tick, Tick, Boom. You helped, I